Mark Lifman was not an ordinary man. He was a figure that seemed to step from the pages of a novel, larger than life, a character of contradictions. To some, he was the man who tipped the parking attendants well, who bought the trolley boys cooldrinks, who moved through Fancourt Golf Estate with a casual smile and a nod. To others, he was the shadow behind the doors of Cape Town's nightclubs, the architect of protection rackets, the patron and the predator. He was the man people whispered about in the hallways of the courts, the one whose name carried the weight of both power and fear. On a Sunday morning in November 2024, his story ended. A shopping mall parking lot in George became the stage for his final act. The sun was still high, and families carried shopping bags, unaware that they were about to witness history written in gunfire. The car pulled past, and the rifles spoke. In seconds, the body of Mark Lifman, 67 years in the making, lay under a silver emergency blanket while chaos spread like fire through the crowd. People ran, people screamed, people flattened themselves against the hard tar, as though the earth itself might swallow them for safety. He had been careful, always moving with a wall of protectors, a fortress of men with guns. But that morning, in that place, the fortress crumbled. They came for him in daylight, in public, with precision. His enemies were no longer hiding in shadows. They wanted the world to know that Mark Lifman was mortal, that his reign could be cut down as swiftly as a bullet to the chest. In the aftermath, the police cast their net wide. A VW Polo, a car as unremarkable as any other on South Africa's roads, carried his killers. Surveillance cameras followed their escape, eyes in the sky capturing the fall of a king. Within hours, the hunters became the hunted. The two men who had pulled off the assassination of Mark Lifman were already on the run, but their escape unravelled quickly.
Johannes Hendrik Jacobs,
fingered as the triggerman, and
had Johnny Besadenhout,
said to have gripped the wheel of the getaway car, pushed their VW Golf along back roads in a frantic bid to disappear into the rural folds of the Cape. They thought they had been clever. Somewhere near Uniondale, they pulled off the road onto a farm track, the kind of dusty cut in the earth no outsider would notice. There, they worked quickly, unscrewing license plates, swapping them out for fresh ones in the hope of shaking pursuit. But the countryside was not empty. Cameras watched, perched above gates and barns, eyes unblinking. One of those cameras caught them in the act. Two men, tense and hurried, caught like insects in amber. That grainy footage would seal their fate. Police swooped in before nightfall, closing the distance with quiet inevitability. Jacobs, once part of elite task force circles, known for his skill with a rifle, was reduced to a suspect handcuffed by the roadside.
Johnny Besadenhout,
his driver, a man who had drifted from nightclub doors into private contracts, sat powerless as the game ended. Both men had, until recently, moved under the banner of PPA, the company tied to Cape Town's rich and famous. The news spread fast. These were not faceless killers plucked from obscurity. These were men with pedigrees in security, men trusted with protecting lives, now accused of taking one. Their capture so soon after the gunfire only deepened the intrigue. Who had given the order? Who had armed them with purpose? And why had they risked it all to bring down a man who once walked as untouchable? Jerome Donkey Boyson, never one to shy from provocation, has publicly accused Alwyn Landman, the owner of PPA Security, for orchestrating the assassination of Mark Lifman. Alwyn himself has since vanished. It was said he received death threats in the days that followed, and almost overnight he disappeared from view. Industry whispers claimed he had left for Namibia and then subsequently moving further into the African continent, slipping into obscurity for his own protection. His name, once tied to Cape Town's wealthy through the services of his security company PPA, now surfaced in a more dangerous context. Both Jacobs and
Johnny Besadenhout
had been connected as contractors to his firm, and that connection raised uncomfortable questions. Yet accusations in the Cape underworld often serve as weapons of their own, hurled as much to shape the narrative as to reveal any truth. Landman, through his company, denied involvement. His operations manager issued statements clarifying that Jacobs had been an outside contractor and that
Besaidenout
was no longer under contract when the killing took place. Still, the timing, the associations, and the silence of Landman's sudden disappearance left a vacuum where certainty should have been. This was not the first time his name had been linked with Lifman's. Their relationship went back years, to nights when Landman stood outside Cape Town venues as a security guard, when Lifman was building empires from behind the velvet ropes. Lifman himself once called Landman the perfect yes man, praising his demeanour while simultaneously distancing himself from him when controversy threatened. It was a bond of convenience, one forged in the nightclub world where power and protection were currency. Now, with Lifman dead, Landman's trajectory seemed less like a rise and more like an escape. Whether he was fleeing danger, evading suspicion, or simply stepping into the shadows until the storm passed, no one could say with certainty. What was clear was that the assassination had turned his name from that of a service provider to that of a possible player in a much larger game. Jerome Donkey Boyson, the survivor of countless assassination attempts, said Jacobs did nothing without Alwyn's word. He said Landman was Lifman's creation, a man who had once been a security guard at Shimmy Club, lifted from obscurity by the very man who now lay dead. It was a betrayal with a bitter taste of irony. But who was Mark Lifman really? To the police, he was Suspect J, a code name that appeared in files stamped top secret. By 2015, investigators had already traced his voice through more than 30 wiretaps, each one painting the picture of a man who sat comfortably at the crossroads of wealth and crime. The application for those interceptions described him in stark, clinical language: a money launderer, a mediator in disputes, a chairman presiding over syndicate meetings where the topic was not property or politics, but Mandrax distribution. He was the figure who resolved quarrels between rival dealers, who smoothed over disagreements before they could spill into gunfire. The documents spoke of him as the hinge on which the entire machinery of the Cape's underworld turned. Yet what struck investigators most was what he did not do. Informants repeated it again and again. Suspect J never touched the drugs himself. He never carried the parcels, never counted the bricks, never dirtied his fingers with the powder. Instead, he orchestrated from a distance, his hands clean, his image intact. That distance gave him both power and protection. If raids were carried out, others were caught. If shipments failed, others took the fall. His name floated above the blood, and the product like a shadow, impossible to pin down, impossible to erase. These surveillance files revealed a man who lived in two worlds at once. In the daylight, he mingled with politicians, businessmen, developers. He wore tailored suits and cracked jokes in courtrooms. He leaned in to chat about his new glasses, his slimmer figure, the sale of a pub he claimed never to have stepped foot inside. He was charming, unbothered, the kind of man who seemed immune to consequence. At night, his voice slipped into conversations about narcotics and nightclub turf. To the public, he was a wealthy figure in Fresnay, a man with a smile and a tip for the parking attendants. To the police, he was Suspect J, the invisible hand that kept the underworld from chaos while profiting from every exchange. But the list of names around him told another story. Brian Weinstein, known in the underworld as the Steroid King, was shot dead in his bed in Constancia in August of 2017. The hit had all the hallmarks of precision and planning, carried out while he lay vulnerable, the walls of his luxury home offering no protection. It was not simply a murder, but a message to anyone who thought their wealth or status could insulate them from the rules of Cape Town's criminal economy. The state alleged that Mark Lifman had orchestrated the killing, driven by a belief that Weinstein had grown too ambitious, too greedy. Their key witness, an anonymous figure known only as Mr. X, told the court he had helped carry out the assassination and that Lifman himself had ordered it. The testimony was chilling not only for its detail, but for the casual tone in which Mr. X claimed Lifman had dismissed Weinstein's life, just another man who had overstepped his place. But it was not only Weinstein who died. The trial that followed became a bloody saga in its own right, a cursed proceeding where death stalked the accused and the witnesses alike. Before the matter could even take shape, 4 figures connected to it were already in the ground. Red Stevens, an alleged leader of the 27s gang, gunned down in Kryfontein. Jason Mates, killed in Mitchell's Plain. Anthony Amir van der Watt, shot while driving between Polsmoor Prison and Kryfontein. And Weinstein himself, the central figure, cut down in his own home. It was as though the trial itself carried a curse, each name on the charge sheet a mark for elimination. Those who might have spoken were silenced, one by one, their stories ending in gunfire long before they reached the witness stand. By the time Lifman sat in the dock, the courtroom was surrounded by ghosts, the air heavy with the knowledge that to be part of this circle, whether as ally, rival, or simple acquaintance, was to invite death. For years, the Western Cape was caught in their war, the battle for the doors, they called it. Nightclubs, security companies, extortion rackets, control meant money, and money meant power. When Cyril Beaker was assassinated in 2011, Lifman stepped in to bankroll new ventures, to build what they called the Brotherhood. His empire stretched from Longstreet to Clifton's beaches, from Fresnay mansions to golf estates in George. He was both patron and tyrant, feared and adored. And yet, beneath the layers of wealth and charisma, cracks showed. He sued his detractors, laughed off accusations, but the charges mounted. Conspiracy to murder, working with gangs. Ordering hits on rivals. The courtrooms became stages for his performance, while the streets outside became graveyards for those caught in his orbit. When the bullets finally found him, it was not in a dark alley or a shadowed street. It was in daylight, in public, where his death could be witnessed by all. It was a statement. The old guard of Cape Town's underworld was crumbling. Jaggers dead, Peterson drowned, Modak in prison, Ralph Stanfield behind bars. And now Lifman, lying in the open with his lifeblood pooling beneath him. But even in death, his shadow lingers. The alliances he built, the men he raised, the enemies he made, none of them vanished with the sound of gunfire. His story is not merely of a man, but of a world where business and blood are indistinguishable, where kindness to parking attendants stands beside accusations of murder. Mark Lifman was a contradiction, a king in a land of shifting loyalties, a figure who lived as though untouchable. And when he fell, it was not only a man who died. His murder was part of a wider convulsion ripping through Cape Town's underworld. Almost at the same time, Ralph Stanfield, another feared name, was arrested. Peter Jaggers, the alleged leader of the terrible Josters, and his associate Billy Peterson, were found dead in the waters of the Vaal River. Their disappearance traced back to a drug deal across borders that had spiraled into disaster. In Bishop Lavis, entire neighborhoods shook under the thunder of a mass shooting, the violence explained by police as gang members defecting from one side to another, secrets carried with them like loaded guns. The Western Cape's police chief warned that this was the price of shifting loyalties, men leaving one faction for another, taking knowledge of operations, drug routes, and weapons caches into enemy hands. The fragile balance between the 28s, the Fancy Boys, and other crews was collapsing, and in its collapse, blood flowed. Lifman's assassination was not an isolated strike, but the loudest note in a symphony of upheaval. Each death, each arrest, each defection redrew the lines of power. What had once been a predictable, if brutal hierarchy became a roulette wheel spun by bullets and betrayals. The murder of Mark Lifman marked the end of one order and the birth of another. His name, Suspect J, may have been silenced in a George parking lot, but the tremors of his death echoed outward, shaking an underworld already in flux. The map was redrawn not only in smoke and echo, but in the bodies left behind, in rivers turned into graves, in suburbs rattled by gunfire. Cape Town's criminal empire had been cracked open, and what would emerge from the chaos was a question no one could yet answer.
Mark Lifman's life ended in gunfire, but the ripples of his death still spread through Cape Town's underworld. The faces may change, the names may shift, but the game remains the same. Power, greed, and survival. If you want to follow more stories where the line between business and blood is razor thin, subscribe to the channel. Each case reveals another hidden layer of South Africa's criminal world, and you won't want to miss what comes next.